Welcome to the Sports Spectrum Podcast, where faith and sports collide. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Episode number 115 of the Sports Spectrum Podcast with Gene Watson, Kansas City Royals Director of Pro Scouting, is brought to you in part by Compassion International. We've been so grateful and thankful to have Compassion be a part of this podcast and partnering with us. You can go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum and sponsor a child for just $38 a month, providing food, school, medical care, vocational training, all done in the name of Jesus. Go to compassion.com, sponsor a child today, compassion.com/sportsspectrum, sponsor a child today. Today's guest on the podcast, Kansas City Royals Director of Pro Scouting. He is Gene Watson, and he joined the Royals as a Major League Baseball scout in 2006. He's been a part of Major League Baseball for over 25 years. He was the Director of Pro Scouting with the Royals and has been since 2012. He oversees the Royals Pro Scouting staff. He was a member of the Miami Marlins, then Florida Marlins back in 2003 when they won a World Series. And of course, Gene was part of this team in 2014 and 2015 with the Royals that went to the World Series in 2014 and then won it over the New York Mets in 2015. So Gene has a couple World Series rings to his credit. He also worked with the Padres and with the Atlanta Braves organization. He played his college baseball at the University of Texas-Arlington. His son, Tyler, was selected by the Angels in 2014's MLB amateur draft, and he now plays in the minor league system with the Atlanta Braves. And Gene has a great story. We talk about his faith, but we talk about sort of these God wink moments, these fork in the road moments that if you had gone left instead of right, your whole life would be changed. And Gene tells a wonderful story about going right in that fork in the road and saying yes to an opportunity to go work in Major League Baseball, getting his start with the Texas Rangers, and it just takes off from there. And Gene's faith, obviously, very important to him. His faith in God through some trials and some battles that he's gone through, including his wife, Melanie, who is battling cancer now, 7 years battling cancer. And Gene talks a lot about the strength that Melanie has provided for him and his family in keeping God first and keeping Jesus Christ at the center of their family. And Gene, listen, Gene works in a job that travels a lot. He's gone a lot throughout the season, but he talks really so beautifully and eloquently about the culture that the Kansas City Royals have created, this culture of loving and serving and being more than just a baseball team, and about the people and about growing relationships. I really love the kind words that Gene had for Royals general manager Dayton Moore, one of his mentors and one of his, and obviously his boss right now. So this is a really fun conversation. It'll take you a little bit behind the scenes and get you inside baseball a little bit more. So without further ado, let's get right to our interview with Kansas City Royals Director of Pro Scouting, Gene Watson, here on the Sports Spectrum Podcast. Gene, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
I am doing great, my friend. It's great to talk to you. I'm excited to hear your journey and hear your story. And I just hear the word Director of Pro Scouting, and I know we're taping this interview in early June around the time of the MLB amateur draft. I have to imagine that this is a vital part of not just your job and the people you work with, but really just the organization when you're preparing to select and take 40 new players. Tell us about this time of year, what that entails for you and your team.
Well, it's a very important time, especially this year when we have so many picks in the top 100. It's our whole entire front office and staff has worked tirelessly. So very important when we've made the 5-year push to win a world championship. We traded away 20-plus prospects in our organization. And so it's time to replenish that system. And so these are very important days for us and our entire front office. Lonnie Goldberg, our amateur scouting director, all of our cross-checkers and area scouts have just done a tremendous job of lining the players up and seeing the right guys. And so we'll see how it plays out. Everybody thinks they have a great draft the first 3 days, and then after a couple of years, it plays itself out.
Exactly. It takes a few years to see where it all plays out. But for every 40 players a team takes each year, many of them will never make it in some ways to the major leagues. Is there a story you can tell of a player that you selected and you saw something in him and maybe others didn't see it, and then he made good on that decision to select, for you to select him or to encourage someone to select him, and you saw like his path take it to the major leagues and you were just like, yep, I saw that in the very beginning?
Well, there was a young man out of Midway High School years ago named a left-handed pitcher named Zach Duke, who is actually pitching in the big leagues right now. And
Sure.
And he was a guy that I was really convicted on out of high school. And, there was a lot of questions as to whether he would sign or not or go to college. And he was a guy that I really fought for. And it wasn't soon after he signed that he moved quickly through the major leagues and actually pitched against us when we were in Atlanta, and Bobby Cox had made a statement in the newspaper that it was good scouting by them and not so good scouting by us. And so that was like the first one where it's like, okay, stay convicted to what you believe in, because what you see and believe in is not what everybody else is going to see and believe in players. And so that was really my first big lesson on staying convicted on players. And Zach and I actually met this winter, spoke over the phone, and I told him the story, and he found it very interesting. And so that would probably be the first one.
That has to be so tough, though, too, because you're in your scouting system, whether you're scouting, and I know you're a pro scout now, but scouting the minor league, scouting colleges, you draft a guy, and then you have to trade him because it's just like you said when you were making that championship run. You got to trade prospects to get players to help your team, and seeing guys like a Zach Duke pitch against you, and you're proud to say that I spotted that guy and I saw that guy's potential, but then he's pitching against you. That's got to be tough.
It is, and what's really hard for me sometimes is that I love players. I have a son in the minor leagues. I love players' stories. I love to hear about what they've overcome, because there's not one player that's reached the big leagues or even signed a professional contract that hasn't gone through an unbelievable amount of adversity. It's not possible in this game. And so, I tend to get a little too close to players sometime because I love their stories, and I pull so hard for players, and it's really difficult because essentially my job is to go out and find their replacement and to build a championship caliber roster to help assist in building that roster and winning a world championship. So it's sometimes a conflict of interest emotionally, but at the end of the day, you just want to impact as many players' lives as you can, and you pull for them and their families and hope that they do well.
I have to imagine there are stories on the other side as well. Those guys that you were just absolutely sold on. You had your finger on them, and you don't have to name any names here, obviously, but you had your finger on them, and you knew you were sold on them, and it just didn't work out.
Well, that's the one that happens more times than not in this game, because it is a miracle to play in the big leagues. And essentially what you're doing is you're watching the player play, you're evaluating their tools. For us, makeup is such an important part of our identity and the players that we acquire. So that narrows your pool of players when you're talking about guys with high character and high moral standards. And so, that kind of narrows the pool a little bit. And so, but it's so incredibly hard to play at the major league level and to stay at the major league level that more times than not, those conversations that you have where you're absolutely convicted that this player is going to have a successful career in the big leagues doesn't happen.
You use the word miracle to get to the major leagues. And I had this question written down of explaining to our audience how difficult it truly is to make it to the show, to make it to major league, because that's all we see. If you live in a small town and you go see minor league baseball, it's fun. But I don't think people appreciate the grind that these guys are going through to try and get to the show. Can you kind of explain even in a little bit more detail why it is a miracle, why it's so difficult to make it to the major league level?
Well, you're talking about 750 of the best players in the world. And when you go around the United States of America, there's over 50,000 high schools in the United States of America. There's over 500 colleges of all levels in the United States of America. And then when you throw in the Latin American countries, Korea, Japan, Cuba, Australia, you're talking about an incredible pool of players that are out there to try to get 750 of the best of them to the major league level. And so much of it, there's a rhythm and a timing to a player's career. I have a young man, my son's in the minor leagues with the Atlanta Braves right now. He's been through 3 organizations in 4 years. This is a Team USA, one of the best players in his area growing up. And to get out of A-ball has been a struggle for him. And it's just a testimony to how hard the grind is, how toxic the lifestyle can be, how important health is to a player's career, and just the flow and rhythm of time, just getting an opportunity. It could be an injury. It could be somebody gets traded. It could be anything that gives you that one opportunity to put yourself on the map to play in the big leagues. And, 1 in 3 players plays 1 year, another 1 in 3 play 5. And so when you look at the star players at Major League Baseball that are making the high dollars and the big contracts, it's because they are truly, one of the best 750 in the world and the very best of those.
You used the word toxic when you were describing the lifestyle of a minor league baseball player or just a baseball player. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, Jason, I just think that we've created such a bad culture for our young men right now. And it's a time when we really need great leaders to step up and be a part of our game. And these kids, it's become such a money game with our amateur system in the United States of America. These young men, when they begin to show their talent from between the ages of 12 and 14, they're automatically put on a ranking of a organization's rankings, or they're being told, you need to go to this event, you need to go to that event. And it's just become a high dollar, almost marketing of our young athletes in the United States when it comes to baseball. The lifestyle, you've got an unbelievable amount of time on your hands when you're not playing, and you're on the road a lot. You're in hotels by yourself, and so it can become a mental grind as far as what's exposed to these young guys. And I think you've heard all the stories of so many major league players that took that wrong turn and their careers were never the same. And so I think we have to do a better job of making these kids understand that baseball is such a small part of their life when it comes to high character and morals and living a life of character and leading other individuals, because that's what this can catapult your life into if you do it the right way and you manage your life. But I think so many times when you're talking about so much time on their hands and the alcohol and being on the road and the culture that has been created by the game, it can really make kids go the wrong way in a quick time.
Is that why you see, I guess more failures than you do successes? And I guess we don't see them, but we don't hear about them. But guys who are done and quit and don't see, see this as a success by playing through minor leagues and grinding, and, they don't make it to the major leagues and they're 28, 29, 30. And it's like, I guess this is it.
Well, I do a lot of speaking in the off season to a lot of kids and a lot of teams and a lot of programs. And, the one thing I tell them is this isn't going to last forever. And, we just have to do a better job of showing these guys that this is don't use baseball. Don't let baseball use you. And we put these kids on such a pedestal at a young age and show them how good they are. And they're talking about full scholarships and scholarships to all these schools and draft money and millions of dollars at the age of 17, 18 years old. And then they get into it and they realize that the players around them have had so much adversity. And you're talking about a kid from the Dominican Republic or Venezuela or Cuba or Puerto Rico that have come from nothing. And now you've got all this expectation placed on you by the media outlets, by the programs that rank these players. And you get into it and all of a sudden, hey, this isn't what I signed up for. I didn't know it was going to be like this, because now you're just one of 4,000 or 5,000 players in the minor leagues when all this time you've been told how good you are, and now you got to go out and produce. And I tell kids all the time, the roadside is littered with players that they pulled the escape hatch. They couldn't handle it. They didn't want the success. They didn't want the pressure of having to live up to that $1 million contract or to live that lifestyle. And the professional game can chew you up and spit you out really fast if you don't manage it well.
We're talking to Gene Watson here. He's the Kansas City Royals Director of Pro Scouting here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Gene, how was your job judged as far as performance? I wonder about that. Not just your job, but I guess the job of a scout. What's the criteria that separates, those that are doing a great job versus maybe someone who isn't? How do you judge your job? Because you miss a lot more than you hit, I guess. It's kind of like being a baseball player, right? So how do you judge? How are you judged?
Well, ultimately, wins and losses at the major league level. And when we came to Kansas City in 2006, it was not in very good shape. It had been an organization that had been mirrored in losing for about 30 years. And we were all with the Atlanta Braves and had won year in and year out for 14 straight years. And I left and went to Miami, and we won a world championship in Miami in 2003. And when Dayton Moore got the position in Kansas City in 2006, he brought me over with him. But I think ultimately it's the bottom line of winning at the major league level. Personally, I think the thing that you have to realize most is that you are not going to be right all the time. But, I've been doing this for 20 plus years, and believe me when I say there have been way more failures than there have been successes. But it's those failures that kind of create that player Rolodex and that mental Rolodex that you learn from over time that tells you, how you're going to react to the next player and the next situation and the next scenario, be it signing a player or doing a trade with an organization. And so I think every scout in the game would tell you that nobody's right or wrong all the time. You have to gather the information and you have to formulate the best opinion that you can. And then after that, you've got to just stay convicted to what you believe about the player or the scenario or the situation and learn from it every time. And we have a lot of young scouts that I tell them, you've got to learn from every report, every player you see, because it's going to affect the way you do your job later on in your career.
We'll have more with Gene Watson, Kansas City Royals Director of Pro Scouting, in just a moment, but want to take a second to tell you about my friends at Compassion International, doing a great job, Christ-centered, every child being discipled in the Word of God, over 150,000 children choosing to follow Jesus Christ in the last year alone through your sponsorship with Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum and sponsor a child today, compassion.com/sportspectrum. Listen, myself, my wife, my daughter, we sponsor a 13-year-old boy from Haiti. It's the best $38 we spend every single month. Listen, you're providing hope, you're providing a future for a child and releasing them from poverty. Think about that, $38, and your $38 goes directly to a child in releasing them from poverty and also providing food and vocational training, medical care. All of these things are done in the name of Jesus. It makes a gigantic impact in a child's life. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum, sponsor a child today. Let's get back to our interview with Gene Watson, Kansas City Royals Director of Pro Scouting, right here on the Sports Spectrum Podcast. Gene, let's learn a little bit more about your journey to baseball and through baseball. You played it growing up, eventually played it in college at the University of Texas-Arlington. Tell us about sports growing up and how that played a part in your life.
I went to a football high school. I went to Temple High School in Temple, Texas at the time that it was a powerhouse in the state of Texas. I played for a man named Bob McQueen, that is a legendary coach in the state of Texas. And so really from the age of 6, through 18, football was kind of the thing that we did in Temple, Texas. I'm 5'8". I was 180 pounds in high school, and I didn't really play a ton of baseball growing up. I played a little bit in Little League, but through the junior high years, didn't really play a lot, and then went out for the high school baseball team my freshman year, got cut from the team, went out for the team my sophomore year, got cut from the team, went out for the team my junior year, got cut, and then was added to the team after the first grade period and was playing right field in a junior varsity game as a junior, and we were getting killed, and they needed some pitchers, and so I came in and pitched and had success and just kept pitching and kept learning and kept developing, and then walked on to a private Catholic school in Austin, Texas called St. Edward's University and continued to improve and continued to develop. And after a year there, I transferred to the University of Texas-Arlington, where the next great mentor in my life, Butch McBroom, allowed me to be a part of that program for 3 years. And, it was a dream. I mean, I feel like the movie Rudy is a cartoon compared to my life. And so God has just really placed a lot of favor on my life. I've had a lot of just really important people right on time in my life. And I feel so fortunate and blessed to have, been given those opportunities to catapult into a career in professional baseball.
What about faith? I know you mentioned the Lord. Obviously, this is a faith and sports podcast. When did that start to take shape for you in your journey to come into Christ?
Well, I was always raised in the Catholic Church growing up. My grandfather, it was very important that we were at Mass on Sunday. And, Really at 16, I gave my life to Christ. I was involved in a group called Young Life and went to Buena Vista, Colorado, and gave my life to Christ in December of my sophomore year. God has, we live our lives every day, asking for God's grace and asking for forgiveness. And our family is a very faith-based family. My wife has actually been battling cancer for the last 7 years. And so, Mike, it's been a very important part of our lives, our faith every day. My son, Tyler, my daughter, Macy, we don't get too far out in front of things with Melanie's situation. And we just, we ask for God's grace and blessing every day on our family and my wife's health. And she is such a strong testimony to God's will and faith, because when she was first diagnosed, we were told it would be 5 years, and it's been 7 years, and her tumors are stable at this point. And so, our faith is very strong in our house, and it's very, very important to us. And it's something that we feel so strongly about every day.
Did you ever doubt God or question him when you found out the news about your wife? Was there a struggle there, even if it was an internal, spiritual, one-on-one with the Lord struggle there at all?
No, Jason, I don't think so, because I've always felt like the good or bad there's a reason for it. There's a purpose for it. I mean, we're all going to be on this earth for a short period of time, and our journey should be about impacting other people's lives. And I never once said why me or why us, or because when we got into this relationship, her family told me this is going to come back at some point. And so it kind of always hung in the back of our minds that this was going to come back, and it did. And but it's just served as great testimony. She is a warrior. My wife is an absolute warrior, and she has inspired so many people in her 7-year journey. And but there's never been one time in my life, and we've had a lot of adversity personally, professionally, that you've said, why are you letting this happen to me? It's just always kind of been, okay, God, what is your plan for my life? What do you want for our lives? And I mean, I can tell you a story about almost being out of baseball in 2002, and my wife and I literally sitting on the couch and praying, God, whatever it is you want for my life, I'm here. Just give me something. And the very next day, getting a call from a man named Dan Jennings with the Miami Marlins, and him offering me a job when I was literally 24 hours away from being out of the game. And so we've always just felt like God's got a plan through good or bad. And I could give story after story of testimony to that, to our lives, our families' lives. And that's just really how we live our daily life.
How do you now take that faith into your job? And I know we'll talk about what your job entails in a minute. Obviously being on the road a lot with a wife who's battling cancer. So we'll talk about that in a second, but how do you take that faith with you every day in not just your life, but especially with your job and such a, what I would call a high profile job, working for a Major League Baseball team with the Royals? How do you take that faith with you in your job?
In a lot of scenarios, it could be different, because so many things are given to you in this profession, and that's the travel and the lifestyle. Again, can be very, very toxic. For me on a daily basis, it's very, very easy, because I work for one of the great leaders, not only in the game of baseball, but in life. And his name is Dayton Moore, and he is one of the greatest human beings I've ever been around in my life. Not because he's my boss, because he's a dear friend. Our families are family. And he's created just an incredible culture in Kansas City with the Royals, in that, we all have a job to do, but our families come first. Everything that we do, from the way we draft kids to develop kids, all of our coaches and managers in the minor leagues, is about character and makeup and creating a culture. And our culture in Kansas City is very much faith-based and centered around Christ. And I think the more that you dug on that, or that any of your listeners would dig on that, they would find that we're very convicted in what we believe Christ to be in our lives and our organization's lives. And I think there's not one person that wouldn't tell you that what we were capable of doing in Kansas City would not have happened without it being centered around Christ. And every decision we made, in the way we handle our minor league kids, in the players that we've taken on via trade or 6-year free agent that have just had a number of adversities in their life, and just the care that our whole organization shows for players. And what we do in Kansas City is important, and winning games is important, and we're working as hard as we can to get back to the World Series and win it. But it's a very small part of who we are in Kansas City, and so it's simple to put it point blank. I mean, our baseball is such a very small part of what we're about in Kansas City, and so just having that structure in my life it's made it very easy with my job.
Now tell us about that job. What does your job entail? What does the director of pro scouting do kind of on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis?
Well, daily, we've got 16 scouts that are out covering the minor leagues and the major leagues. It could entail, communicating with our international scouts in the Dominican Republic over a player from another organization that is from one of their countries. It could be dealing with our amateur scouts on a potential trade that they had that player in high school or junior college or college, and they have the background of that player. And we have a very good system. We have a group of scouts that are a lot of ex-major leaguers, a lot of minor league players. And it's a very unique structure. It's a very special place to work. But really, I would call it like air traffic control. You're talking to scouts about players. Okay, we need you to go here. We need you to cover this, and just creating information on the 29 other organizations' prospects, their players, who do we match up with in trade, talking to people from those organizations. So it's a lot of phone work. It's a lot of airport work. It's a lot of time in the hotel and the ballparks, but there's not one day where I haven't woken up and feel so blessed and fortunate to not only be doing what I'm doing for a living, but to be doing it with the people that I'm doing it with.
And it's always nice when you win. And I know in 2014 and 2015, those were special seasons for the Royals. 2014, you lose an incredible Game 7 at home to the Giants, and it's the first time the Royals have been in the World Series in many, many years. And then in 2015, I say this because I'm a New York Mets fan, you beat my Mets team at Citi Field, and you win it all. I just wonder from just a sports perspective, a baseball perspective from your job, what memories stick out when I mention 2014 and 2015?
Well, it all began really with the wild card game and coming back against Oakland in 2014. And then you kind of look forward to that and the winter meetings the year before and us making the trades for James Shields and Wade Davis. And that was a very difficult decision for this organization because we were giving away 4 of our top prospects, which has kind of put us where we are today, the push to win and winning a championship. But looking back, it was the absolute right thing to do. But winning that wild card game in Oakland kind of started a run of just incredible memories and lessons in life because and Dayton says it all the time. It's a lot harder to manage success sometimes than it is failure. And as we began to evolve and start to win, and you can kind of feel yourself, pulling yourself a certain direction. Everybody kind of maybe trying to get theirs, or having selfish thoughts and taking credit for certain things. And I think we did an incredible job of managing it. And I'm not so sure that had we won in 14, that the same focus and desire would have been there in 15, because it's incredibly hard to get to the World Series and it's even harder to win it. And so I just think that it was 2 seasons kind of combined into one, just this incredible journey of managing success, managing failure, not giving up, people coming together for one cause and being a part of something bigger than them. And those 2 years were an absolute dream, and there's not a day I don't wake up right now and believe that we won't get back and that we won't win when we do.
Well, especially when you've been there, now you kind of know what it takes, and it's a process, and you saw what happened in 2014 and 2015. I wonder, in that 2014 season, because we had on Jeremy Affeldt recently on the podcast, and he told us about that Game 7 from his perspective as a Giants pitcher, coming in and then kind of bridging to Madison Bumgarner, who was just insanely good in that Game 7. I just wonder, from your perspective as a member of the Royals and watching that game, what did you take away from that? Like, at the moment after the game's over, are you able to kind of just say, wow, that was a pretty great season? Or is there such a letdown, I guess, from losing a Game 7 at home? And I know hindsight's 2020 now because you go on and win the World Series the next year, but go back to that Game 7 in the aftermath after losing to the Giants.
Well, I actually flew my pastor, Joe Champion, in for Game 7 because Joe, I was not going to go to Kansas City in 2006, and my heart was just telling me stay in Miami. It's safe, it's comfortable, and if you know, in a God moment, I'm driving to San Antonio with my daughter and my pastor, Joe Champion, out of Celebration Church in Georgetown, who's an incredible speaker. Played football at LSU. He calls me and he says, "Hey, just checking in on your life. How are things going?" And I told him what was in my heart. He said, "Hey, God doesn't want you to play it safe in your life. He wants more for your life. You've got to step out. You've got to take risk." And so he was the one that talked me into leaving Miami and going to Kansas City. So when we got to Game 7, I flew him up to Kansas City for the game, and he stayed with us, me and my wife, in our suite in Kansas City. And I just remember when the game was over, just the heartbreak of how much we had invested all the days on the road, away from your family, all the things that every organization and every employee of every organization invests. And to get that close, it was just heartbreaking. But again, we had the perspective of where my wife's health was and the things we were going through on a personal level. So you just keep it in its proper context. And I'll tell you a quick story about the next morning after the loss. We had a send-off for the team at the stadium, and there's probably 10,000 fans there. And our whole front office is along the wall behind home plate. And so the send-off ends and the fans are leaving, and the front office, we all walk into an interior elevator, go up to the 6th floor of Kauffman Stadium. And for about 3 hours, you could hear a pin drop. You couldn't hear anything but keyboards moving. Nobody was talking. And it was just the most somber moment and just the low point of everything we had put into trying to win that World Series. Knowing it was a miracle that we were even there, beating Oakland in the wild card game. And about 3 hours in, we get a text from Dayton to come to his office. And we sit in the office, and he hands out a list of the free agents for the upcoming season. And it was like, okay, 14's over. We're moving forward. We're not looking back. And it was that moment that I knew in my heart, we got a chance to win the World Series next year because of just the way Dayton led us and wanted us to believe, hey, this is over. There's nothing else we can do. We're moving forward starting right now. And it was that moment that I thought, you know what, we're going to win the World Series next year.
That's so cool. We're talking to Gene Watson here, Kansas City Royals, Director of Pro Scouting on the Sports Spectrum podcast. I know when I worked at ESPN, many people would ask me, how did you get that job? How did you get a career in broadcasting at ESPN? How does that start? So I wonder for you, what was your start in baseball? How did you get that first job? What did it entail? Maybe it was a professional job. How did you get started in baseball?
Well, I finished my playing career a little early my senior year at UT-Arlington and was literally home with my now wife, girlfriend at the time, and we're sitting on the couch watching a game, and my phone rings. It was a Sunday night. I'll never forget it. There was exhibition games going on. It was late March, and it was Jeff Rogers, who was our traveling secretary at UT-Arlington, who also worked for the Texas Rangers. And he called me and he said, hey, my nickname was Snacks. He says, hey, Snacks, we got this job in the clubhouse if you want to come up and work in the locker room, but you got to be here tonight. And so I looked at my girlfriend, and here we are. We're talking about me going back to the University of Texas in Austin and finishing my degree and getting on with our lives and moving forward to I'm literally packed in my car heading back up to Arlington. And so my first job, and I had worked on the tarp crew and the grounds crew kind of in the summers while I was playing at UTA, but now my first real job in the game is working in the Ranger clubhouse in the locker room with the players. And so lived in the clubhouse, April, May, June, July, August of that year. And then in September, Melanie came up and started working in the ticket office and then ran the players' wives' nursery at night during the games. And so for 4 years, that was kind of our life. And didn't know where it was going to take me, didn't know where it was going to go. And then in 1994, moved home and started a program for youth players that Rafael Palmeiro, Kenny Rogers, and Bobby Witt helped me start. And we took a bunch of kids that wouldn't have a lot of opportunity to play baseball, and we played a very competitive schedule. And I had a lot of really good kids on that team, and the Houston Astros called and offered me a part-time scouting job, and the rest is kind of history from there.
I love stories like that because everybody has a spot, and I always say everybody has sort of a fork in the road moment too, where you could go this way versus that way. And if you chose the way that you didn't go, who knows where you would have ended up. And yet you get that call and you're in the car and you're with the Rangers the next morning and everything changes from there. Tell us about progressing through the major leagues. I know you worked with the Padres and the Braves, and eventually you talked about your time with the Marlins and even the difficulty of leaving the Marlins. Take us through sort of that progression of your major league career.
Well, from Houston, after working for the Astros for 3 years, I was hired by the San Diego Padres in November of 1997 to be a professional scout. And at the time, that was a unique dimension to an organization. There were no pro departments. There were about 3 teams that had guys that, like from spring training, April, May, June, all the way through the season, saw minor league and major league coverage. You either had your area scouts after the draft doing it, or you had your guys in the major leagues covering the major leagues that would bounce down if something was going on. So I was on the early end of that. We went from worst to first and lost in the World Series in 1998. We were swept by the Yankees to worse in 1999. And after the 1999 season, there was a lot of restructuring going on in San Diego, and I was fired. I was out of a job about an hour when I get a call from Roy Clark with the Atlanta Braves, who called and said, "Hey, we're starting a pro department. We want to talk to you about it." And my boss, Eddie Epstein in San Diego, was really one of the innovators of pro scouting and really one of the innovators of statistical analysis, now called analytics. And so I was really, really fortunate to have that experience in my life and have that structure, kind of old school scouting, a new dynamic to professional baseball and the analytics. And so Atlanta hired me. I was there for 3 years. And after 3 years in restructuring, I was let go again. So, I was fired twice in the first 6 years of my career. And that was the point where I was like, okay, God, what do you want for my life? Because this ain't working. and as you get into these hotels and the rental car buses and you're on the road, you're trying to do a job, but you're also trying to find meaning for your life. And it was at that point that I told myself, no matter what, I'm going to start doing more and trying to impact people's lives and help people. And I told myself that if I ever got in a position in the game where I could help people, that was something that was going to be really, really important to me. And it's something that's really, really important to me still today. But after that 2002 firing is when my wife and I sat down and prayed to God for God's will and which direction would you want me to go. And that's when Dan Jennings called and hired me. And from there, Dayton Moore brought me, who was my boss in Atlanta, brought me to Kansas City with him. And it's kind of been a ride ever since.
And in 2017, last year, you were the recipient of the Legends in Scouting Award from the Professional Baseball Scouts Foundation. What did that mean to you? Tell us about that.
It meant so much to me because when they called me, I thought they were joking. I mean, I literally, for 30 seconds, was speechless to have a man like Dave Yoakum, who is one of the most highly respected men in the game, call you and tell you you're receiving this award. So after 30 seconds of silence and him thinking that I hung up, I said, Yoke, I'm too young for this award. And he said, you're not as young as you think. And it ended up being one of the most incredible nights of my life for my family to be there. But more importantly, I received the award with a man named Bruce Keeson, who passed away 2 days ago. He was not feeling well that night. We didn't know what was going on. It ended up being cancer, and he passed away 2 days ago. One of my brothers in life, one of my dearest friends. And, the last couple of days have just been an incredible amount of reflection on our relationship. And so what was a special night for me and meant so much to me for the reasons I was there and the people I was with even means more to me now because of Bruce and him passing and what he meant to my life and my career.
That's powerful. And you were quoted, I remember reading an article recently, and you were quoted in receiving that award and saying, "Scouting is my life, my passion," obviously, with the job that you've been doing for so many years. There's so many people that have jobs that they aren't passionate about or wish they could be doing something that they love. Can you encourage our listeners, maybe those that are listening and might be stuck or feel like they aren't doing what God has called them to do and having a passion? Can you just encourage them for us?
Well, it's basically what my mom taught me from a small age is that every day you wake up, God's will is going to be in play. And the thing that you can do is do your part. And that's the only thing I've ever tried to do is wake up and do my part and answer the bell and try to, in as many people as I encounter in a given day, try to impact their lives. Just give. I feel like if you pour into people's lives and you try to help people, that God's favor is going to come your way. And I get the phone calls and the emails and the text messages, every day from friends and family friends and friends of friends that, I want to work in baseball, or I just feel like I could be doing more in my life. And the thing that I would say is that more is right in front of you. You may not see it and you may not think it, but it's there. But it's really, being selfless in the way you go about your business. And I had to do this too, getting over the what's in it for me. Because when you can get past the what's in it for me and to pour into other people, the favor in your life is going to come your way. And that is one of the greatest lessons that Dayton Moore has taught me is it's not about you. It's not about how this impacts you. It's about us and we and being selfless and just pouring in. And if you can do those things, God's going to lead you in the direction that he wants you to go.
And it's obviously ultimately about Jesus and what he's done for us. So I ask you, when I say that name, Jesus Christ, what does that mean to you?
Well, it's my Savior. I speak to him daily. Not always in the best way. It's not always under the best circumstances. Sometimes it's in the heat of the moment, but just asking for his will and what direction he wants me to go. And I'm not a perfect person. I don't pretend to be a perfect person. I ask for God's grace every day. I pray to Jesus every day and what he has meant to my family. And I truly believe that there is a plan for all of our lives. And sometimes the plan doesn't make sense. And sometimes we question it and we want to know, why this is happening to us. But Jesus Christ has to be the center point of all of our lives in knowing his understanding and what he wants for our lives moving forward.
We asked this question to all of our guests as we close this podcast interview, Gene, and it's a question that many people have answered. It's not an easy answer sometimes, but it's a pretty easy question. So I'll ask you, with everything you're living through right now, obviously with a wonderful job, your son playing baseball in the minor leagues and raising a family, your wife battling cancer and overcoming and working through that, what are you learning from God right now during this season of your life? What has he been teaching you?
He's taught me appreciation and, every day just to appreciate what's in front of you because it can all be taken away from us tomorrow. And I get emotional with that because we've been through so much as a family, and I just feel so blessed to be able to wake up and be with the people I'm with and just meet new people every day, but more just appreciation and knowing that it can all be taken away tomorrow. Nobody's guaranteed tomorrow, the next day, the day after that, but living in the moment and truly appreciating God's grace and the gifts that are a part of my life and understanding that all the trials and tribulations that we've been through individually and as a family and just, knowing that God is such an important part of our lives and so good.
He is Gene Watson, Kansas City Royals Director of Pro Scouting. I've been blessed to talk to you, Gene. Really enjoyed getting to know you and your journey and hear your story here on the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us and hope to talk to you again soon.
Jason, thanks so much.
And we do thank Gene Watson, the Kansas City Royals Director of Pro Scouting, for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. I really enjoyed talking to him. I mean, he had such a great perspective on life. I love that when I asked him about what he's learning from the Lord right now, he just said appreciation. And that's something that we should all think about and take with us every single day and just be appreciative of being alive, of being able to wake up and take that breath and saying, okay, God, you've given us another day to glorify you, to be thankful for all that you have done for us. And we just pray for Gene and obviously for his wife, Melanie, battling cancer. We pray that she could be healed in Jesus' name. We also pray that she would take whatever this obstacle is that she's learned and be able to take her test and turn it into an amazing testimony to tell others about how good our God is. So we thank you to Gene, and we send our prayers and best wishes to him and his family as Melanie continues to battle cancer. And we thank him for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. We also thank you, and we thank Compassion International, $38 a month. Go to compassion.com/sports spectrum. Sponsor a child today. Release a child from poverty. Go to compassion.com/sports spectrum for $38 a month. It'll be the best $38 you spend each month. I promise you that. Go to compassion.com/sports spectrum and sponsor a child today. Thanks so much for joining us here on the podcast. One of the really coolest ways that you can help advance this podcast and help advance the gospel of Jesus through the stories that we're telling is to tell others. So take this podcast, share it on your social media page. Let us know that you listened, that you heard the podcast. Tweet at us at sports_spectrum. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram as well. You can also email us directly. You can email me, jason@sportspectrum.com, jason@sportspectrum.com. And as always, leave a review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts. It really does help get the word out about the stories that we're telling on the intersection of sports and of faith. Thanks so much for joining us. We will see you next time right here on the Sports Spectrum Podcast.